Well, hey there, 5 o'clock, Monday evening. You know what that means. It's time for the 5 on AlignedLife podcast. Plenty of articles here for us to go through today. Headlines that relate to the pillars of spirit, mind, body, money, and creativity. Going to do something different this week as well. When we get to the money section, I'm going to bring in some of the traditional market economic commentary as well, because there was enough stuff last week that I thought it made sense to sprinkle that in amongst the more important themes that we're going to be talking about. But before we get to this week's episode is sponsored once again by Santiago. Yes, that is my firm, formerly known as RLS Wealth, the rebrand to focus more on the life planning, the alignment of money with your authentic life, making sure that your values are reflected and you are aligning your resources in a way that allows you to live your authentic life. I don't know too many firms out there doing it. The way that we operate with our clients, the Aligned Life Plus and the Aligned Life Relationships, that's not a clever name. It's by design that it aligns with this podcast. But the way we work with our clients is not the way you're used to seeing financial advisors navigate. And not everybody's ready for that. But if you are looking to live your authentic life, discover what that authentic version of yourself looks like, and then have somebody help you design a plan that aligns your resources, financial resources, but also energy and time with that life, we might be the firm to talk to. Head on over to santiago.life. Or you can reach out to me any way that you want to set up a time to chat and see if it makes a good fit. But Santiago is something I'm very proud of. The momentum is building. I'm excited about the work that we're going to be doing for clients going forward and the impact we make on the profession as well. So santiago.life, thank you for sponsoring us today, Santiago. Okay, let's get to the first section of spirit. Well, let me give you kind of a high level of some of the things we're going to talk about. So as I was breaking through and working with Claude this week to come up with the subjects for us to discuss, there was a common thread amongst all of these, which I like that we are able to find that. And this week, it's kind of a processing. And so these sections of spirit, mind, body, money, and creativity, we will be examining stories and some books even, and some headlines that deal with processing. So the first being, how do we sit with loss without getting swallowed by it? How do we tolerate financial uncertainty without letting it ruin our lives? What does a contemplative practice actually do in the brain? And can putting words on page genuinely change something inside of us? So this is what this episode's about. It's about optimizing your life. It's about learning how to actually live it, the hard parts included. And we'll start off with spirit. So a question that I've been sitting with and has been posed this week: what if you don't need to believe before you practice? What if belief is actually the result of the practice, not the starting point? And there's a body of research that just dropped that reframes the entire relationship between faith and action. And this one actually kind of messes with me a little bit, because for many things, I believe you have to believe before you see it. And so I've talked about this before numerous times on the podcast, on this show even, that when you believe it, you will see it. When you believe in the future version of yourself, you will see it. It doesn't happen the other way around. Although this headline and this story is suggesting that maybe it's a little bit different with faith. So a new study published in Humanities and Social Science Communications examined how religious practices like prayer, scripture, meditation, and contemplation all interact with the brain's neuropleasure circuits. Researchers concluded that faith may actually emerge as a consequence of religious practice rather than its cause. In other words, you don't have to believe first, you start doing, and then the belief follows. And in some regards, this kind of maybe makes sense. If we think about spirituality and getting into religions and different things, there's a lot of faith that you can't see, you haven't experienced, and it requires you to believe. And it's hard to believe in something like this, where if you go through the practices, if you're going to mass, or if you're going to synagogue, or if you're going wherever, or you're doing your spiritual practices, the more you do it, the more you get comfortable with it. Maybe then you do believe in it. So I think on this one, I may actually buy into the fact that the belief comes after the doing. So do it first and the belief follows. It makes me also think about one of the arguments about passions. I don't subscribe to this fully. I do think this is a possibility that's not directly connected, but passion is connected to our higher power, so it falls within the spiritual realm. Is that some people say don't follow your passions, which drives me crazy. I think you should follow your passions. It doesn't mean your passions have to become everything and you throw out all that you're doing just for the passion, but I think you should be exploring your passions because there is meaning behind them. But the other side of the saying is do something you're good at and passion will follow. And while I don't love that it is true. And I experienced it myself. I didn't love being a financial advisor when I first got into the profession. I stumbled into it. And the more I did it, the better I got at it. A passion did develop. Little did I know that the passion for financial advice was to lead me to this life planning world and this work that I'm doing now. I couldn't have gotten to here. Santiago wouldn't exist. Aligned Life wouldn't exist. My life's work would not be known if I didn't start out with financial planning first. And so I do think that it is possible for something to develop as a byproduct of the action. So with this headline talking about faith and your belief developing by doing the actions is similar to kind of like for some people, doing something good will bring passion to you. But that's not the only way to find your passions. I think if you have a passion, you should pursue it, see where it takes you, let it start out small, and then if it needs to grow, you can let it grow, or maybe just stay small. But don't ignore your passions. That's a little tangent off of this, not directly connected, but that reversing of the belief comes after the actions made me think about that thought. So that's how I got there, if you wondered. In research, I ordered a book because of what Claude found. So there's a book called Into the Silent Land by Martin Laird. And it is a book that's being talked about a lot right now, and it's been around for a while, but it makes a compelling case for why Christianity has its own deep tradition of silent prayer and meditation that most people never access. And the argument in the book, which I'm excited to read, it's like 170 pages, is that silence isn't the absence of God, it's where God tends to show up. And so I want to read this book because I've done a lot of reading about meditation from the Buddhism practice. I think it's really cool to know that while meditation's not what you usually think about when you think about about Christianity, I grew up Catholic, so that's where my background is. Never once have I heard anybody in church or when I went to Catholic school talk about meditation. Prayer, yes, and I had already made the connection later in life that prayer and meditation are very similar, but I'm interested to read this book. And so what I really liked, was the final statement and why I wanted to keep this in, was that silence isn't the absence of God, and you can replace God with whatever your belief system might be, but it's not the absence of God, it's where God tends to show up. And in this silence of meditation is where we get a lot of clarity, we get a lot of visions, we get a lot of understanding, and really one of the only ways to do that is through meditation, where you are eliminating the distractions, including your own mind, to get deeper into your thoughts, to get deeper into knowing yourself. So I just wanted to share that book because I ordered it off of the research this week and looking forward to reading it, and just thought I'd put it on your radar. All right. I think I forgot to do this last week, but every section is going to end with something to think about, a prompt, a question to think about. So what's one practice that you should let go of because you stopped feeling it, not because it stopped working? And so usually we get rid of stuff because it doesn't work, but sometimes even something might be working, but you are no longer feeling it. It's no longer resonating with you like it once did. Have you ever stopped anything like that? And if not, is there something that you continue to do today that's yielding some results but doesn't feel authentic to you? What's something like that you could give up and see how things change? All right, let's get into the mind. We've all heard about the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And for decades, people felt like they were doing grief wrong because they weren't moving through it in that order. Thanks to neuroscience, though, we may finally have a better map. A new review published in Trends in Neurosciences found that prolonged grief disorder, PGD, may stem from misfires in the brain's reward system. The circuits most active in people with intense grief are those involved in reward, motivation, and attachment. Grief at its core is the brain registering the absence of someone who once brought reward. Which I think is kind of interesting, is that what this study is saying is that we're grieving somebody that made us feel good. And so I think a lot of times we grieve because we think we're grieving because we miss in the absence of that person. And yes, that's part of it. But what neuroscience is saying is we're selfish. It's not so much that it's the person itself, it's how that person made us feel. And if you think about it, you've probably lost somebody in your life that you didn't really you didn't really like them, or they didn't make you feel good. And so maybe there was a little bit of grief of that loss and made you think about your life. But then as time went on, it probably didn't take you as long to get over that person as it would somebody that you're much closer to. And yes, the people we're more close to, we love more, but also there's a good chance that they made us feel better. So I thought it was just an interesting thing. And a couple quotes I pulled from it. Professor Bryant, one of the professors running it, what we see is that grief is very much driven by a more reward or goal-oriented function. Your brain is saying, I want to be with that deceased person again. This is opposite of what other mental health conditions offer, like anxiety or depression, which are driven by an aversion to something and stem from a different part of the brain. So it's interesting to see just how this plays out differently in our brain. Grieving is never an easy process, and it's interesting that the grief is coming from somewhere different than we probably expect. And I don't think it means we're a bad person. We can't control the way our brains are hardwired. But I also wonder if it is a way to help navigate grief a little bit more. If we know what we're missing the feeling that person was giving us. I wonder if we're able to think back on the good memories and relive some of those moments to get that feeling back to help with the grieving process. Sometimes, the fix to the problem is, getting what you need. And obviously you eventually have to allow grief to take its course and get over somebody. But can you do it in a way that isn't causing prolonged grief like this newer PGD is? So that was really interesting. So my question to end this section, is there something you're grieving that you've never given yourself permission to name? Not just a person, a version of yourself, a relationship, a life you thought you'd be living by now. All right, we go into body next. So we live in a culture that celebrates grinding and treats rest as laziness, and we're paying for it in performance and mood and health. But the science on sleep has gotten so clear and so specific this last year that it's hard to ignore anymore. And I think it's hard to debate how important sleep is, but if you look at our lives, do we really give it the priority that it needs? And I'm guilty of it. I'm trying to get the 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. I'll never forget, I had a friend come speak to the AGC, the Community for Advisors that I co-founded. And she was talking about rest and taking care of yourself. And I forget the number of hours it was, but she was talking about like Marines and their shooting. And if a Marine only had 6 hours of sleep, the shooting was off by a significant percentage. And if they had 8 hours, it was much better. And her comment was, are you a Marine? And just made me really think about how less sharp I might be because of the amount of sleep. We've all got excuses. I have plenty of them. I have 3 of them, really. It's tough with our boys and our family schedules with practices to really get in a position where I can go to bed early enough to get up early enough to do things I want to. So I'm in a stage of life right now where I end up sleeping in a little bit later, 6:30, by no means late. I would love to be in a situation where I get up at 5 to knock out some meditation and some work and some writing before the boys got up. But that would require me to get to bed earlier than possible. We sometimes don't eat dinner till 8:30, 9 o'clock, depending on when practices are done. And we still try to do it as a family. And then it's getting into the evening routines. And I don't want to sacrifice time with the boys. So, all these excuses on sleep. But let me get to the study. A comprehensive 2026 review of sleep science concluded that if a pharmaceutical company developed a substance that enhanced muscle protein synthesis, optimized hormonal recovery, improved neuromuscular coordination, accelerated injury healing, enhanced cognitive function, and reduced injury risk, all simultaneously with no side effects, it would be the most valuable product in sports medicine history. Take a guess at what that substance would be. The substance is sleep. If they could manufacture sleep in a pill, then it would be the almost perfect prescription to give. No side effects, all of the positives. And we all have access to it. It's free, just finding the time to sleep. So I just think it's interesting. I love the way that article frames it. It gets you all excited that they've got this cure. Here's this magic pill that you can take. No side effects, all the things you need, and it's just sleep. And it makes me realize that so much of what we need, we already have. Again, sleep, we already have it. We have access to it. We just abuse it for tons of reasons. And, sometimes it's legitimate reasons, and I would like to think that some of mine are. Other times I get roped into a show. We don't watch TV very often, but every once in a while I'll get roped into a show and I'll stay up watching 2 episodes instead of 1. There's all these other distractions. But if we're going to be intentional about living our authentic life and pursuing our authentic life and being the best version of ourselves, and the alignment of spirit, mind, body is an important part of that. And one of the ways we can take care of it is sleep. So you've heard this a million times. Now you've heard 1,000,001. Sleep is really, really important. And we, at least in the States, I don't know about the globe, but specifically in the States, we're terrible at it. And you can't grind and hustle the way that we like to talk about if you're not resting properly. So I want you to be honest with yourself. In this section, what are you sacrificing sleep for? And what is it you're gaining? And is what you're gaining actually worth what you're losing? Money. All right. I mentioned earlier we're going to do a little bit different. After I get through the story I found, I'm going to go through a few. I think I have four bullet points from the last week when it comes to more stock market economic news, because I think it's important here, and sprinkle this in for the Santiago and Arliss Wealth clients, replacing the weekend review video I did. I'm going to sprinkle it in here so they get that as well. So a new survey of 2,000 Americans found that 6 in 10 believe current economic policies have negatively impacted their cost of living, and more than 3 in 4 say they're concerned about a possible recession, with families delaying home purchases, having children, and making major life decisions because of economic uncertainty. And truthfully, this headline could be out most years. There's always a demographic that feels as if things are really tough. And for a lot of people, it is. And I've talked about this, I think maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, K-shaped recovery, K-shaped economy. One segment of the economy is still growing and doing very well. Those at a certain income level and net worth level, and then those at another level lower are struggling, and it's kind of separating. The wealth gap is getting wider right now. A lot of it has to do with those who are able to participate in the stock market. The stock market is continuing to do well. We've had 2 previous years really well. This year, another good year, despite some volatility and ups and downs. You're going to hear, a 6-week run of the market being up. If you're not in the market and you don't have investments going up and you're not making enough money that you feel that you can provide for yourself and your family, food is getting more expensive. Gas right now is really expensive. It's understandable why these numbers would be here. The fear of recessions, I feel like those are always there. Recessions typically happen 18 to 24 months. Every 18 to 24 months. We haven't had one for a while. And recession, if you don't know, is 2 quarters back to back of negative GDP growth. So the economy is slowing 2 quarters in a row. We won't know when we're in a recession until we're already been in one, because it's backward-looking information. And but that fear is always there. And the longer we go from the last recession we've had, the closer we are to the next one. And so there's always headlines, there's always newsletters being sold to stoke that fear. The reality of it is recessions have always been a part of the process. There's a business cycle. We have recessions and recoveries. It's not a fun part of the business cycle. It's not a fun part of the economy, but it's not anything new. And I think that we're pretty far removed from 2008, 2009, the great financial crisis, like the biggest recession we've had for a while, but we're still kind of benchmarked to that. Not every recession is that severe. Not every recession is a global financial crisis. Sometimes it's just the slowing of the economy and other things going on. So yes, we are probably closer to a recession than we were yesterday and last week and the month before. When it's coming, who knows? But recessions are normal. And we will get through them, and things will get better on the other side. And by the time you know that we're in a recession, we're already a little way into it. So we're already closer to the end. So I'm not surprised about the fear about a recession. And so much of this discontentment and this fear and this uncertainty is compounded by the headlines that are out there. Both sides of parties, both sides of the news want to make the other side look bad. So they're going to talk about how they're wrecking the economy or wrecking the markets or whatever it might be. All of those things there. So it's all very real, but that uncertainty is causing people to change their spending behavior. And we talked about it last week. In those uncertain times, it allows you to better understand what you really value, because you are making choices regularly every single day to allocate the dollars that you do have to the things that are most important. When you feel like you don't have enough, you trim to the things that are most important to you, and you can reflect on that to see what are your values really. Going a little bit deeper, the Stanford Institute of Economic Policy research in 2026 this year, the outlook makes the case that affordability will continue to be a top concern for consumers, and that despite solid overall growth, the underlying environment is fraught with uncertainty. The deeper question isn't economic, it's how do you make intentional decisions about your life and money when the ground keeps shifting? Just a little bit more to add to what I already talked about, so I won't dive deeper into that. I do want to hit some of the economic news. So last week, and I expect to make this more of a regular on this show. I enjoy talking about some of the market stuff, even though the whole premise of when I did this on a weekend review video was to remind you that these headlines that may or may not impact your financial plan and your portfolio, they don't impact it over the long run. These are momentary headlines. There's great charts out there that show you all the reasons economically, market-wise, where you should have sold and the economy was going to crumble, and they ended up not doing that. So it's good to have these here. I think this is the spot to put them in, just to tie this in, because this is an important part of things, just to kind of give you some understanding of what's going on and what you might be hearing in some of those headlines. So April non-farm payrolls came out last week at 115,000. So on Friday, they announced 115,000 jobs, almost double what was expected, actually more than doubled. The expectation was 60,000 new jobs. So March and April were the first back-to-back six-figure months since late 2024. I hate when they add those things, like since when, like 2024. That hasn't been that long, but there was a period of time where jobs weren't growing. Unemployment is at 4.3%. So that hasn't changed a whole lot. And we've talked about in the past on other videos, but the Federal Reserve is paying attention to unemployment amongst other things. So that's why that number is important. In addition to just that means people are working or not working. We got a little bit more insight to the April 29th Federal Reserve decision to hold rates. That was, it had 4 dissenting votes. And so there were 4 people who said they wanted to make changes to the rates. It's the most since 1992. Usually they're all in agreement, or they've had less than 4 people dissent. So 3 dissenters wanted the easing bias removed from the statement, signaling rates might need to rise rather than fall. So we're all waiting for interest rates to fall for our mortgages and debt servicing. We want to see that go. The market will like when rates fall, but it doesn't seem to be impacting the stock market too much. But when rates go down, that's usually better for business, makes them more profitable, makes their borrowing costs lower. So their stock prices typically go up. So that's what they're looking for. And some of the Fed wanted to take that out, letting you know that we might have to raise rates in the future. So the Federal Reserve's always in the news. And it'll be something we'll pay attention to as more of these go on. Consumer sentiment, probably no surprise given the first couple of headlines I talked about. It hit a 48.2. You don't even know what that number is, but it's down 3.2% from April's prior record low and off 7.7% from a year ago. So this is the second straight month of record lows when it comes to consumer sentiment, which is just basically how is the consumer feeling. And the consumer is really what drives the economy. If consumers aren't feeling good, they stop spending as much, companies start becoming less profitable, and now we start to see how sometimes recessions can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the consumer doesn't feel good, they're afraid of a recession, they don't spend as much, they save more of their money, which would be prudent action. Makes sense to do that. But if enough of them do that and they stop spending in a major way, companies start losing money, not making as much money. Now we spiral towards a recession. So did the recession happen because of consumer sentiment, or did consumer sentiment become because of the recession? Chicken and egg type of thing here. Just really interesting. I think these things are fascinating to follow and just pay attention to. I don't put too much weight behind them. I wouldn't recommend making any decisions because of this, but just understanding what's going on and also understanding the next steps that could follow because of it. Finally, a little bit of positive news. The S&P 500 gained 2.3% for the week. The NASDAQ surged, which is more your tech stocks, 4.5% for the week. And the Dow was just barely up. But the S&P and NASDAQ notched their 6th consecutive winning week. It's the longest streak since 2024 again, and mainly because of tech. Now, that sounds awesome, but let's go back 7 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, 9 weeks ago, tech was getting smashed. Some of the names that have led this back up were down 30% in just a couple days. So when you're investing, this is why you take a long-term approach. This is why for most of my clients, I'm a fan of diversified funds, not trying to pick stocks, because if you were picking stocks earlier this year and you picked the tech stocks, you might have thrown the towel in and then you missed this recovery. So yes, in a 6-week period, it looks like the NASDAQ's doing awesome and it's doing well. It's all-time highs. But there was a period of time just a month ago, a little bit more than a month ago, where it was really scary for the tech stocks. And so headlines only tell you something. It's a snapshot, a moment of time. That last week's headline was a positive one, but it hasn't been that way all year. So don't forget that when you're investing. All right, let's bring money to an end so we can get to creativity and get this wrapped up. What decision are you not making right now because of uncertainty? And is the waiting itself costing you more than the risk would? All right, creativity. There's a form of creativity that I want to talk about, and I actually wrote about it before I even had these done. Last week, I wrote about my enjoyment of writing. I've always loved writing. You can't see right here, I have a bunch of notebooks. Not all of them are mine. I'll show you real quick. 2 of these are mine. The other ones are the boys. Nice leather notebooks. I love writing in them. And so writing is the topic of this week's creativity. Research published in the Journal of Contemporary Psychotherapy describes writing therapy as a process of investigation in which the act of writing functions as a critical instrument with the aim of promoting self-healing and personal growth. This isn't journaling as a wellness trend. It's one of the most studied and validated tools for processing emotion, reducing anxiety, and building self-awareness. So not only is writing, good for jotting down those ideas, remembering things, but there's a more of a therapy component to it. And I don't know. I mean, think about when you've written things down and you go back and reread them, you process them differently. I enjoy writing for a different reason. I would much rather write pen and paper, as I wrote about in The Omen. I don't know if I'm getting any of these benefits or I'm not doing it intentionally, but I just thought it was interesting that writing is a very good way of helping you figure out what's going on inside of you. And I think that one of the reasons might be it's almost a way to step out of your body and read what's going in. So if you are being honest and truthful and thoughtful about what it is you're writing as you're trying to figure things out, and you step back and you read it, you're reading it like you would read a novel. Like you're not reading it with your internal dialogue, you're reading it as an outsider, and it might allow you to get some fresh perspective. So if you're struggling processing anything, even if it's not a big thing, just something little, try writing about it. Write about your feelings, write about the emotions about it, write about what you want, what you don't want, just write about it, and then walk away and maybe come back a little bit later and read through it. See what you learn about yourself when you come at it from a different perspective. I'm going to give you another book. I did not order this book, but I did research it. Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. It's supposed to be a very good writing book about creative writing, but it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with actual writing, which is why I was interested about it. The book is more about showing up, being honest, and trusting that the process of making something will teach you things about yourself you can't access any other way. And so that might be a little bit of what I was just referencing. The title comes from advice given to her by her father gave her brother and her the night before a big school project. Just take it bird by bird. So if you want to learn more about writing from a different lens, that's a book I want to recommend. Even though I haven't written it, the reviews are very good. The message behind it I thought was a great compliment to this research I found from the Journal of Contemporary Psychotherapy. All right, so to bring the creativity to an end, when's the last time you wrote something no one was ever going to read? What would you say if you knew no one was watching? Give it a try. All right. That is it for episode number 4, 5? I lost track already. I think we're on 4 this week. Episode number 4 of the 5. Let me double check real quick. Yes, episode 4 of the 5. All right, so that's it for this week. I want to thank you for tuning in, getting a little bit better at working through these headlines and preparing for them properly. Looking forward to doing more of these, getting more efficient, getting better with the storytelling, and getting some graphics and some cool stuff in here as well. But as an early viewer of the show, I want to say thank you. I do appreciate you tuning in. It's steady numbers. If you see any value in this, feel free to forward it to somebody else who would benefit from hearing about topics outside of the normal news to help them align their spirit, mind, body, money, and creativity now. All right. I'll see you next week. You know the time, Monday, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on the YouTube channel, also on the podcast players. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next week. And until then, keep pursuing.